Welcome to our new podcast, The World is Our Oyster. I'm John Atkin, and my son Will Atkin and I have decided to start this podcast and look at the world from our point of view. Why the world is our oyster? Well, because we live in Norwalk, Connecticut, which happens to be one of the most prolific harbors for growing oysters along the East Coast in Long Island Sound.
And I had a couple questions for you today. I think it's a really appropriate way to kick off our podcast is, talking about oysters. It's obviously the phrase, so we're kind of doing like a little play on words there. But it also is like Norwalk's. It's number one export or something like that? Like, am I off base there?
Well, it's definitely a large export for the state of Connecticut. It's a $30 million industry in the state of Connecticut. They're very active shellfish beds, both recreational and commercial, all up and down the coast of Long Island Sound in Connecticut, and then, of course, over on Long Island as well. And an interesting thing about the phrase, the world is our oyster, it actually comes from the Shakespeare play, The Merry Wives of Windsor. It was said by Pistol to Falstaff in that play, and it actually connoted violence at the time, and the phrase has since sort of calmed down. Pistol said to Falstaff, the world is your oyster, is what he said to Falstaff, and he said, and I will get it by the sword. And by taking the sword and opening up the oyster, he found the pearl. So then there was joy in opening it up. So it went from violence to joy. Now, we don't find pearls in the oysters around Long Island Sound. We mostly slurp them down raw or put them on, oysters Rockefeller or deep fried. But they certainly are a popular a food item along Long Island Sound and in the rest of the country.
So what does it mean when an oyster makes a pearl? Like, is that so? It's like a calcium sort of thing, right?
Well, I don't know what the physical makeup of a pearl is, but it actually starts when a piece of sand, I guess, gets into the oyster and ultimately grows. But I think that pearls for the most part now are actually grown in oysters, but the seed, so to speak, the sand is planted in the oyster. It's not necessarily created in nature because people very rarely find a pearl in an oyster. But
that sounds very 21st century.
To
plant the seed
But oysters have been around forever. In fact, when the New Haven colony was founded in Connecticut back in the 1600s, the oysters were sort of the canary in the coal mine in that people found these oysters. Now, what made them crack them open and eat that large gray, white, slimy thing originally, I don't know, but people did.
And I wouldn't have been the person pioneering that.
Right. Yeah. And they were huge. They'd get really large, larger than the ones you see now. But a lot of people were actually getting sick from eating oysters back then. And it turns out that because people were getting sick, they discovered that the bacteria from human waste was getting in the oysters. And since oysters are filter feeders, they feed everything, all the water that goes through their body, they're taking the nutrients out of. They're also taking away some of the bacteria, and then people were eating the bacteria and getting sick. So the New Haven colony at the time discovered that and made sure there was a specific differentiation from the place where people went to the bathroom, if you will, and a different area of the harbor where you could eat the oysters. So the first public health laws in the colonies, really, before we were the United States, were created because of the oyster. And now we've learned that, obviously, 300-400 years later, and they're very, very safe to eat and monitored, from the minute they're the spat is attached to the culch, to the original shells, to a full-grown oyster, which is right now about 3 or 4 years old.
So you said a couple things there that I know: the spat and the what?
The spat are the little larval oysters that attach to the culch. The way the oysters grow in Long Island Sound is that the oyster growers dump empty shells on the oyster beds out in the sound, and then the larva or spat of the juvenile oyster attaches to the shells, and they start to grow. And once they grow to about thumbnail size, which takes about a year, then they get transplanted to a what they call a growing bed, where they're closer to the surface, so the sun can cause their growth, and then they begin maybe 3 or 4 years old, and they get to market size. Then they take them out again to deeper waters, where the oysters sort of strain all the nutrients into the clean waters, and then they're ready for the market.
Hmm. So like before that, right? Like a natural oyster that lived a non-interrupted by human life, they just sit at the seafloor. Like
Yeah,
where is their natural? That's just where they are, and
yeah,
that's how
they're
they can grow so massive because
right. Yeah, because the closer they are to the surface, then the more sunlight they get and more nutrients they get, and then they just keep growing and growing. They don't move; they're immobile, so they
how do,
can't move at all.
how do they eat? Is it
They eat their system is basically like a vacuum. They just suck in water and then they expel water, and their bodies take the nutrients out of the water that they need, whether they're, you know,
Oh, like you
mini,
said, and like you were saying with the crap, not to get back on that, but they're filtered, so they filter. So
yeah,
obviously, whatever's in the water, they're going to eat. They have no control over that.
right, right, and then it builds their body, and then they get bigger and bigger. And when you and I eat an oyster, um, we're eating the whole body. We're not
Right,
cutting parts of it off. We're just
right.
slurping it down, and it's delicious in spite of some of the descriptions you may have heard.
It is. You do get a little like pearls starting in your mouth sometimes, some sand, but that's okay. It's worth it.
Well, that has something to do with maybe the shucking too. Is the shucker? Sometimes
It,
there's sand in it, and they try to clean around the edge to make sure there's less sand. But
you know,
um,
I was never good at shucking.
yeah,
That's tough business.
Shucking oysters is very tough, a lot tougher than clams, because
There's
they really know how to seal themselves pretty
Yeah,
well.
there's a towel involved. You can't stab yourself, right? Like you
Yeah,
gotta. There's a lot of there's a lot involved in that. Yeah, where
exactly.
and then that's why I love mussels though. Not that we're talking about mussels here, but those are easy. You just throw them in and they.
Well, they're steamed. You can't eat mussels raw.
Right, right,
Yeah, so
yeah.
they're
That's a good
steamed,
point.
and a lot of people don't like raw oysters, but like them cooked, roasted, or made with certain other recipes. Um,
So
but
what's your favorite way to eat an oyster?
I like to eat them raw.
But
There's
like,
not,
do you throw anything on it? Like,
I throw a little cocktail sauce, or sometimes vinegar, sometimes a little Tabasco sauce, just depending on the mood. But there's, to me, so tasty without any sauces.
yeah,
You can just slurp them down that way.
I've been this probably is because my fiance Steph loves lemon, but I've been putting lemon on them recently, and it's a nice mix.
Yeah, yep, it certainly is. And there are all kinds of different oysters. You travel around the country. We have uh, the Latin name just escapes me, but the East Coast oysters you find in the Gulf of Maine, Long Island Sound, Chesapeake Bay, and sometimes in the Gulf of Mexico, or a certain oyster, Virginicus. Boom. I forget the second name of the genus and species. And then you get out to the West Coast in Seattle, Puget Sound, and there are different kinds of oysters there. So they all have a different taste. Some of the oysters in some of the estuaries along the East Coast are saltier than others, depending again on how salty or the
Is
saline
it
content of the estuary.
is it just because I've heard this, I'm just asking, but like is it safer for us to eat like our local oysters compared to like if I flew across country and tried an oyster from out on the West Coast? Like, would that be because I'm being exposed to like bacteria or something? Like, is there?
No, the oysters are any oyster you get in a restaurant, or buy, in a seafood shop, or literally tracked from cradle to grave by this huge interstate sanitation system set up by the FDA. And what happens is every oyster that's pulled out of the water is put in a bag, and that bag is tagged with the date and the bed, the actual bed that that oyster is pulled out from. It's refrigerated the whole way, whether it's a Long Island Sound oyster in Seattle or a Puget Sound oyster in Connecticut. And then the chef actually has to maintain the tag in case there are any illnesses. Then he can track, or she can track, what bed it came from and alert any other entities around that there was a bad batch. But again, that is so rare now um, with the system that this interstate commission is set up, that there's really no issue of getting sick eating raw mollusk and shellfish. I think the warning is, if you are immunocompromised, you probably shouldn't eat raw mollusk and shellfish, and that's fair enough. But if you have a healthy immune system, um, there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to eat oysters.
That sounds like a really good system. It's almost like we could have used it for something in the past couple of years.
Well, exactly. I mean, there's a local oyster festival in Norwalk, and about 20 odd years ago, a number of people got sick and with food poisoning and showing up at the hospital the several days after the festival, and it turned out it was improperly stored chicken that was causing the illness, not the oysters. So,
Who would have guessed?
yeah, it's safe to eat oysters. It's safe to eat chicken. It's safe to eat anything that's inspected and is refrigerated properly. But we probably shouldn't get off on illnesses and everything. I know there is one of the things we're trying to do with this podcast is to do a couple of divergent and interesting subject matters. And we're going to switch gears completely from oysters and go into something that Will is very conversant in. You can see from the musical instruments in the background, is a musician and has a lot of interest, not just in making music, but understanding how music is recorded and made available for the world to hear. And there's this new system similar to surround sound that is being developed, and that Will has taken an interest in, and he's going to explain how it works and how it'll make it different for you to listen to music in the future.
Well, I'll try to explain it. Thank you
Okay.
for that great introduction. It's called, I don't know if this really doesn't matter for any of it other than if you want to go check it out, but it's called Dolby Atmos. And it's like my dad said, I love making music, so anything musical really interests me. And I was just scanning this article and I found them talking about the fact that they were going to be mixing the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds album in Dolby Atmos, which is exciting to me for a couple different reasons. But I think the main reason is the advancements in music technology recently. So I'm not like somebody that's backing like 3D before 3D happened in theaters and then it kind of was a bust. I'm not fully backing this. I just think it's a cool concept and an interesting thing to talk about, and especially to kind of like frame it in layman's terms. So help me do that, and I know you will, so I appreciate it. But right now, well, let's start at the beginning of recording. So recording actually started as one output source, right? That was called mono, and mono came out of one speaker. If you had two speakers, you were still hearing that same thing come out of both of those speakers. That's mono. Then they came out with stereo, and stereo was a revolutionary way to listen to music because we have two ears, right? So the interaction of two different speakers coming at us at once was new, and there was bands that used this greatly to their advantage. Since then, they're really minus surround sound, which is kind of caught on like in the movie area, but not really. I mean, it has, but not in like there's not a lot of people that I walk into their houses and they have like a dedicated surround sound thing. But what this technology that Adobe's that Atmos is bringing to the table is a way to create surround sound in a different way. Where right now, surround sound is a linear plane. All your speakers are at the same height, which means that there's no necessary there's not necessarily a height involved with the sound. Atmos brings that element because it depends on your setup, but you can have a couple speakers that are placed above your head, up and to the right, up and to the left, and then behind you, which allows in the mix to almost have like a 360 view. I was explaining it before. It's almost as if like I'm sitting and I'm immersed inside the music because of I'm surrounded by speakers. And right now, the way we listen to music is very much at us from two separate speakers. This is creating a space where it's more 360.
So it sounds as though it's something that an audiophile would really appreciate, but your average listener slash viewer may not be able to really hear the nuance, hear the difference in the new technology and the old.
I would argue that it would be something subconsciously that you'd feel more immersed. I'd say you'd come out of that experience being like a little more wowed than you would have without it. Now, that's like a tough thing to test, obviously, but I truly believe that because there's little things that I do in music all the time when I'm making music that are very subtle that change a big aspect of it. I mean, you know this with directing. When you direct a show and you're talking to an actor, there's nuances in there that maybe not be very apparent to the person watching, but you know that it affects them based on how
Right.
long their pause was, something like that.
That's true, but also it to an average listener, difference between mono and stereo is obvious, and the difference between stereo, two speakers, and surround sound is obvious. But I hear what you're saying. It's a lot subtler in this, but and maybe subconscious, but there's still a difference to the listener. Where is the development of this technology now? Is it being put to practical use, or is it still in the experimental phase?
Yeah, so like I said, when I started this out, they have a mix complete of pet sounds in Atmos. So it's a usable product. It's not in development. It's fully fledged. But I think I know you're saying this is a music file thing. I think it's something that people can get excited about in general, because of the immersiveness it allows you to sit in. If you think about surround sound, it's each speaker has a numerical value to it, and that's all it has. It has volume. This adds more than volume, which I think everybody can relate to because we know what it's like to sit in front of a stereo spread and have something sweep from the left to the right. Now it's allowing us, instead of sweeping just left to right, it allows you to sweep 360. So thinking about that concept, that's exciting to a lot of people. You can you can get that idea. So,
Well, even Dad can get that idea, yeah. But whether I sit there and hear it is a different story.
you would hear it. It'd be like hearing something over your back right shoulder, opposed to just being right to your back right. It's location. It's something like you said, and I agree with you. It's something you need to experience.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm talking about something that I haven't experienced, but I've done extensive, research on this because I love this stuff, and I think it's an exciting new technology that maybe we'll see in the future, maybe not.
I'll take a listen, and
You can, if you type into Spotify, if you type in Dolby Atmos, it's how it sounds, spell it how it sounds. It has this like track that'll play that gives you that idea. It is in stereo because the headphones don't have the technology for it, but you kind of get what they're going for. So
cool. Well, I'll take a listen.
All right.
So, well, again, that will be our format. I hope that both of these subjects piqued your interest, and we'll come up with two entirely different ones. Next week, we might talk sports. We might talk the environment. We might talk what else? What else have we talked about talking about? Will stage plays,
local
local
stuff.
history in Norwalk, Connecticut, and look down below and tell us something you want us to talk about. Our point is not to argue about things, but to show how the different generations look at maybe the same subject. I happen to know more about oysters than Will. Will knows a lot more about music than me. So we just sort of having discussions about them. Sometimes it may get more argumentative and I may not understand something or he may not understand something. Or we'll find a subject we both know something about. So the world is our oyster. And that's why we're calling the podcast The World is Our Oyster, because we want to be able to talk about everything and anything. And as I mentioned earlier, and I discovered genus and species of the oysters found in Long Island Sound, Chesapeake Bay, etc. Crassotria virginicus, genus and species of the common oyster you find in Long Island Sound.
How could you not remember that? That's such an easy thing to remember.
Well, I remembered virginicus because they were originally found in Virginia. All right. So we promised top 5. We're going to have a top 5 list every time, not necessarily a la David Letterman. We won't have a punchline, but we might have a punchline. We never know. So this time for our debut, we're going to do favorite cities. And why don't you go first?
You want me to go first? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So top 5 cities. I've ever been to. We should have music for this. We will do that. That's why this is the debut, because you always find out your mistakes in the first one. Okay, so my top 5 list in no particular order. No, I'm just kidding.
I thought.
I'm joking. I'm joking. Okay.
I was told that I had to have a 5 in order. So.
That's why I said it.
Okay.
Okay, so 5 on my list is Lima, Peru.
Interesting.
Second one, I had to have a bit of South America in there. Yeah, 4th one is Liverpool, England.
Good one.
3rd one is Dublin, Ireland.
Dublin.
Did I put a D at the end again?
Yeah.
It's hard not to. I know it's Dublin. I wrote there's no D. I know that. All right. Second to last, so number 2 on my top 5 list is Madrid, Spain.
Now the drum roll.
Yeah, now the drum roll. And I'm afraid it's not going to be a good payoff. That's okay. My favorite city in the world is New York City. Easy. Can't beat it. There's no better city.
Well, I'll tell you, I love the Liverpool selection. Will and I went to Liverpool together after your high school graduation, right?
2012.
Yep. And had quite a time exploring Beatle history. And then we went down to the Cavern Club and Will got to sing on stage. What'd you sing? Hey Jude?
No, Imagine.
Oh, Imagine. Yeah. On the stage at the Cavern. So that was a great trip.
That was great.
Yeah, Lima is a great city too. I mean, there's so many, it's really hard to narrow it down. And I wasn't as imaginative, I guess, in mine and finding these smaller little gems. I went for the big mega cities. So I'm starting off with number 5 is a West Coast city, Seattle, Washington. I love Seattle. I love the mountains and the Puget Sound and the fisheries and the downtown and Pike's Market and the stadiums.
I thought we weren't going to explain.
I'm sorry. Yep, we're not supposed to explain. Never mind. Sorry, I'm rambling.
It's okay.
Number 2 is also the West Coast.
No, number 4.
Number 4 is also the West Coast. No explanation. San Francisco.
Wait, that was number 4, San Francisco?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow, that's low. I thought, okay, go ahead. I thought you would put San Fran as higher, knowing how much you like it, but go ahead. And now I'm going to jump across the pond and go to what, for a minute, when I was writing the list, might have been first, but no explanation. London. Love London. Everything from the history to the theater scene to the pomp and circumstance to the eye on London, and I'm not explaining. Number 2 is Paris. Spent a lot of time in Paris. Been lucky to have traveled there. My aunt, Will's great aunt, lived there for a number of years, and it's just a spectacular city. And we did not plan this ahead of time, but drum roll, my number 1 is also
New York, New York.
Wow, nice.
It's a city so nice they named it twice or whatever they say. Right down the street from us. I was born in New York. 4 when my parents moved out here to the burbs, but I just get in there as much as I can. 1, just to walk around, 2, to see a show, 3, to go to museums, 4, to walk around, 5, to go to a jazz concert, 6 to walk around. So we're allowed to explain number 1.
Yeah,
it's interesting. We really literally had not talked about it. Number 1,
no, I know.
New York for both of us.
I'm glad we didn't talk about it because it was a nice little surprise.
Yep, and even though it's they're out in Queens, it's also the home of the New York Mets. So
well, yeah, that's
important to both of us.
Yeah, so. yeah. Well, not right now, but
right. Well, 3 in a row.
Yeah,
as of our recording. So we'll see. They haven't lost in July yet.
This is going to come back to bite you. Now it's on tape. Can't get away from it.
Yeah, I know. All right. So let us know what you think. I mean, are we rambling too much? Are we picking interesting subjects? Do you have any subjects you want us to ramble about? If you have a top 5 list you want to hear, I mean, who really cares what John and Will's top 5 list is? But if you want to, make a suggestion.
Care. And we'll be also really responsive down there as well. So feel free to comment. We'll, if you want us to do a certain topic, we're happy to do it. We, like my dad said, it's a podcast where we want to talk about interesting things. The reason for the name, The World is Our Oyster, is that, we really want to kind of gravitate towards stuff that excites us and excites you guys as well. So
the world is also your oyster.
It is and that is the original Shakespeare quote, as you said. So
right, the world is your oyster, but the world is our oyster in terms of being able to explore it and talk to you all about what we've discovered in our lives and in terms of the world locally in Norwalk and the world. Have a good evening, everybody. Thanks for listening. Make sure you comment down below, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon. Like and subscribe. Good night. Bye.